Good morning, my name is Nihal. Welcome to Asian Network's Big Debate. Today, are you happy to wait longer for non-emergency operations? I mean, you can probably listen to the question and say, who would be happy to wait longer for an operation? And while perhaps happy is not the right word, do you understand why you will have to wait longer? And how does it feel to be in a situation where you have what is called a non-emergency operation? So a hip replacement, a knee replacement. The head of NHS England, Simon Stevens, says waiting times will be longer for routine operations, like, as I mentioned, hip and knee replacements. He says he can no longer guarantee treatment in the 18-week target time. So how do you feel about this? 81869 is the text number. You can WhatsApp me on 07920 500 200 or email thebigdebate@bbc.co.uk. And we'll start talking about this subject, the NHS, something that affects all of us, especially as we get older. We'll talk about it after the news with Rahul Sheikh.
Thanks, Nihal. The President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, has revealed his plans for the Brexit negotiations. He's rejected Theresa May's request for talks on the terms of Britain's withdrawal to run side by side with negotiations on the UK's future relationship with the bloc and any trade deals. Donald Tusk has been speaking at a news conference in Malta.
If they want to achieve a constructive agreement, it means that they should discuss and negotiate only with the 27 as a unity. This is the only way to achieve anything during this very difficult process.
And as you've been hearing this morning, there will be longer waiting times for non-emergency operations in order for improvements in A&E performance. That's the warning this morning from the head of NHS England, Simon Stevens, who says choices have to be made as he sets out his priorities for the health service for the next 2 years.
Over the next couple of years, we want to have more funded operations on the NHS, but we recognise that the rate of growth is probably going to have to be a little bit slower than it has been at points in the past, because we also want to make big improvements in cancer care, in GP services and in mental health services as well.
Elsewhere, there's been a deadly bomb explosion in the tribal region of northwest Pakistan. Officials say at least 6 people were killed and many others wounded in the blast that hit a crowded market in Parachina. It's thought the area is a Shia majority. Asian Network has been speaking to some young girls in East London just a week after the terror incident in Westminster. They've been telling us about the hate crime they've experienced in the aftermath of the attack, which left 4 people dead and 50 injured. 12-year-old Alishba had this to say.
My 2 friends, they both wear scarves. They were getting on the bus and a couple of white men, they started swearing at them on the bus and saying that just because they were Muslims, they shouldn't be on the bus. So my friends, because they didn't want any trouble, they just got off the bus. And I personally think that's very wrong.
Hotels, restaurants and tourist attractions are concerned there'll be staff shortages if immigration is strictly limited after Brexit. With more, here's the BBC's Kamal Ahmed.
The British Hospitality Association said it was facing a recruitment crisis if the ending of freedom of movement meant a sharp drop in EU citizens coming to work in the UK. A report by KPMG for the BHA said that it will take 10 years to reduce the need for EU workers by training British staff.
And Salman Khan is on BBC Asian Network this Sunday in an exclusive takeover. The Bollywood megastar has shared unheard stories about the making of some of his biggest hits.
We were shooting for Jab Pyar Kisi Se Hota Hai. I heard the song. It was like the most fabulous song that I've heard. So I tried to put in that movie, then I tried to put in some other movie, and I tried to put in some other movie and some other movies. Nobody took that song from me. So then we started Pyar Kiya To Darna Kya.
Saido Berahino says his failed drug test last year was down to a spiked drink. The Stoke striker served an 8-week ban while at West Brom. Now in cricket, Pakistan just did enough to inflict their 5th victory in a row over the West Indies in T20 cricket. It's after Pakistan were bowled out for 133. It was all looking good for West Indies, but Shadab Khan's excellent spell with the ball restricted the Windies to 129. Asian Network News and Sports. There's more in an hour.
Is Asian Network's
Big Debate
with Nihal.
Rahul, thank you very much indeed for the news and sport. Welcome to the Big Debate with me, Nihal. Today we're asking, would you be happy to wait longer for your non-emergency operation? The boss of NHS England, Simon Stevens, says waiting times are going to get longer for non-emergency operations. That includes things like knee and hip replacements. I'd especially like to hear from people who are working in the NHS and how you're coping. Because it seems as though a week doesn't go by without us hearing a story about the increased pressures, the funding gaps, the queues getting longer. It seems just doom and gloom. But what is it like to work in the NHS? We hear from the politicians, we hear from the bosses like the boss of NHS England, Simon Stevens. But what about you? You can remain anonymous if you wish to. If you're a nurse, you work on a ward, you work in a hospital, if you're a GP, if you're a doctor, if you're a surgeon, do get in contact with us. Or perhaps you're just someone waiting for a routine operation. Are you happy to wait longer if it means cancer treatments and A&E is improved? Who would say no to that? But what is it like living with a hip that is no longer fit for purpose, or knees that are no longer fit for purpose? Perhaps someone in your family, your mum, your dad, your aunt, your uncle, your nan, your granddad, or indeed you yourself are having to live with this. How does it feel? How demoralising is it? Perhaps you're now inside more than you would have been because just getting around is so painful. Perhaps you resent the idea that this is a non-emergency operation. It's an emergency for you, isn't it? If you can't go to the shops on your own, you can't be independent. Maybe you think the NHS should be meeting its target of treating surgery patients within 18 weeks and you're angry. You pay your taxes, you have done for decades. Now that's 4.5 months. Get in contact with me. Tell me what you think. You're working in the NHS. Do you believe that this is just common sense? What the boss of NHS England has said. He's got limited resources. He has to do what he can. He has to prioritise. And of course, cancer treatment should be prioritised because early treatment, early diagnosis can be the difference between life and death. No disrespect to anyone who has a dodgy hip or dodgy knees, but not as serious, is it? Get in contact with me. There's lots of ways of doing so. You can email thebigdebate@bbc.co.uk. We have a WhatsApp number, 07920 500 200. You can text 81869 or you can call us. Here's the number.
Call 03459 440 445.
chance. दोनों हाथ हवा में करके लाके चोरी घड़ी से मॉडर्न बेबी से जो पंगा लेगा हो जाएगी प्रॉब्लम. पूरी फिक्स है, फायर है, सब लड़कों की डिजायर है. यो चलता फिरता फैशन सो बेबी बिजली की नंगी वायर है. मैं पागल हो गया तेरे पीछे, दिल मेरा तेरी लगे नीचे. टक टक बजती जो डांस फ्लोर पे जब तू नाचे. आके नीचे, आके नीचे, आके नीचे, आके नीचे.
स्पीकर का वॉल्यूम उसको तेज पसंद है, बेबी को बेस पसंद है. ओ बेबी को बेस पसंद है. जब वो नाचे मुझको उसका फेस पसंद है, बेबी को बेस पसंद है. 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 बेबी को बेस पसंद है.
It is 11 minutes past 10 and you are listening to Nihal on the BBC Asian Network. It's the big debate and a conversation that comes up from time to time, hourly, is the NHS, or indeed the state of the NHS. And how does it feel for you, if you do work in the NHS, to be constantly told that targets are not being met, that patients are having to stay on trolleys for hours upon end, that A&E targets are not quite getting there, that you are constantly under stress, under strain, under pressure, and that patients are not happy and politicians are not happy and people who work around you are not happy? Is it that bad? We've just heard from the boss of NHS England, Simon Stevens, that things are going to have to be different, that waiting times are going to be longer for routine operations like hip and knee replacements. He says he can no longer guarantee treatment in the 18-week target time. So that's 4.5 months. You go and see a doctor, the doctor says, oh, you know, you're going to need a hip replacement, it's on the way out. 4.5 months. That's what it was. Now it's going to be longer. But NHS patients are going to have quicker cancer diagnosis. It's going to be faster A&E care. So do you put your hands up and say, well, OK, fine? Do get in contact with us. There's plenty of ways of doing so. 03459 440 445. Text 81869. You can WhatsApp 07920 500 200. Or you can email the big debate at bbc.co.uk. Let's speak to Suki Kaur, a guest of mine who's in Birmingham. Suki, good morning.
Morning, Hal.
Now, Suki, this is something particularly relevant to you, isn't it?
It is, yes.
And that's because you know about both sides of this debate, don't you? Because,
yeah,
you know, I mean, you tell us.
Okay, well, basically, I've had cancer since I was originally 11. I was in remission until I was 17. And now I have multiple tumours throughout my stomach, liver, lungs, pelvis, little tumours everywhere. So I've had that since I was 17. So I've been through the NHS. I've seen it at its best. I've seen it at its worst. And I can honestly say that where it is now, I've never seen it this bad. And it's very, very worrying. It's very worrying indeed.
How often do you use the NHS, Suki?
Well, for me, I've been using it constantly, really. I mean, blood tests, checkups, going to see my oncologist, having some routine CT, MRI scans. Well, for the last sort of year, they're not even routine anymore, sadly. And it's not even my consultant's fault, bless him. I'll have a scan. It will be cancelled because someone else's appointment was more urgent. And then when I go to get my results, and, you know, when you're already sort of, you know, you're apprehensive when you go for a set of results. But the last time I've been for results, I've turned up, waited an hour in the waiting room only to be told that the radiographer has not written up my results and they'll call me again. So like I said, and I've never seen that in 17 years where I've gone to an appointment, and that's happened for 3 times consecutively now. And I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I was in hospital 6 years ago, and I was having life-threatening surgery. My liver was completely taken over by cancer. I had to have a biliary duct reconstruction because I had bile leaking internally. So I was jaundiced, I was infectious. I had a small baby at the time. 6 years ago, my operation was cancelled 3 times. And when I finally made it to the operating theatre, nearly a year after the initial problem, my surgeon actually said to me, a routine 3-hour operation actually ended up taking 9 hours, with them nearly losing me twice because so much bile had leaked into my internal organs. He goes, your insides, his exact words were, your insides are like concrete. How you have survived this long, Suki, I do not know. So, I mean, that was 6 years ago. And what I'm seeing now is that I'm very, in one sense, I'm very grateful that I'm already in the system. I'm very forceful. I will ask questions. I will push them. Recently, one of my friends got diagnosed, and sadly, they've only got 2 months to live. His wife's expecting a child, and his was missed due to them being very reluctant to scan him because of the cost of a scan. He'd had perfect health before that. A year of stomach aches, bloating, feeling sick, not digesting their food properly. It was missed in stomach infections. Indigestion remedies were given, only then to be found out he had a massive tumour that had sort of metastasized to several places in his body, and now there's nothing they can do. So the cost of the NHS, sadly, is costing people's lives, because I just do not understand when they say there is no money, there is no money. Well, I've been hearing that for the last 15 years, but the way, it's coming down to sort of me, the people around me, I'm seeing it in action, how bad the situation is. Before, you're quite disconnected from it. You hear about cuts, you hear about targets not being met. But when you're in the system, you're thinking, well, hang on, I'm getting regular appointments, I'm getting seen, I'm getting treated, my friends are having the similar experience. It can't be that bad. But when you see it and you've seen it sort of steadily decline from what it was to what it is, I shudder to think what anyone who's newly getting diagnosed, anyone who wants to sort of, put their hopes in the NHS, because it's a scary thing. Cancer is probably on the extreme end of it. But another example is I think the debate today is about, the knee operation, the non-essential operations that they call them are going to be delayed longer. So there's more funding for what they call essential treatments. Or let me share another story with you. There's a member of my family who's had a really, really sort of bad knee. And it's gone on for about 6 years. And the doctors are just like, don't worry, have physiotherapy, do these exercises, you'll be fine. And now when she walks, her knee and her foot is at a 45-degree angle when she walks. And it's progressively gotten worse, and she needs a knee replacement. That's all she needs, and she will be fine. But they've said to her that you're only 48, you're not eligible for an operation yet. We only do these operations when it's serious. But I'm not sure what they think is serious, because now she can't go to work because she's a teaching assistant in a school. It would take one child to fall into her, and that would cause her knee to break. So her employers have said to her, you're a health risk now, and it's better that you don't come back to work. And they've tried to work with her. She's tried to push her doctor to try and get that operation brought forward, and they won't. So now she's at home now. She can't work. She's got 2 children, and she's gone from earning, a decent salary every month to being reduced to job seekers allowance. And that's not a choice that she would have ever made. She's one of the most hardworking people that I know. She's a single parent. She's worked every single day of their life, and the NHS has failed her. And do I feel any better as a cancer patient being prioritised over someone who wants to work, someone who wants a regular life, someone who wants to carry on being normal, saying to them, well, I'm sorry, you're not urgent enough, but her whole world is now collapsing around her? there's a real disconnect in what a doctor or these NHS bosses think is essential to how it affects a person in the real world. And that gap between what people think is the problem and what actually is the problem, that gap of knowledge is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like your sister-in-law is effectively going to be imprisoned in her own house.
That's what she said. Those are the exact words she says to me. She's like, Suki, what am I going to do? So what we've tried to do is, because she's a teaching assistant, we're trying to get her to do private tutoring at home. But she's now a prisoner in her own home. She can't get out. And she, sadly, because her work was always within walking distance, she walks everywhere and relies on public transport. Is she entitled to disability living allowance? She's too scared to try because she doesn't want to be seen as a benefit scrounger. And the rules around that now is that if you have simple knee problems, that doesn't equate her. She's already been for a consultation and they've already sort of told her that it's very unlikely you'll get it because your problem is not deemed serious,
Suki, we have a junior doctor who's based in Lincolnshire, Dr. Kishan Rees, on the line. Suki, stay with us, please, and thank you for speaking so honestly to us this morning. Dr. Rees, good morning.
Morning now.
Dr. Rees, you heard Suki Kaur talk about her treatment, and I don't mean the treatment that's attempting to deal with the cancer that's in her body, but the treatment that she suffered by turning up, waiting for an hour, told the radiographers. No, I mean, this is bizarre.
No, absolutely. I mean, I listened to everything that Suki had to say, and I think firstly, thank you for speaking so candidly and openly and honestly about what must be very kind of challenging and emotionally upsetting for her, because I've scribbled 3 pages worth of notes in terms of listening to that, and she was very eloquent and said lots of things that lots of doctors agree with, and ultimately we need patients to start speaking up and start saying, I agree with, there's a couple of medical technicalities I disagree with, but 95% of what she says I agree with entirely, and all I can do is apologise and say, as a medical profession, I think we should be doing better. I think we should be pushing for more money because you do need more money. You do need efficiency as well, and you can't just spend that money willy-nilly and waste it. But I think it's ironic, isn't it? Because to think this time last year there was going to be a 7-day NHS, and now we have this.
Well, I mean, Dr. Rees, stay with us a minute. Khalid has called in. Suki, please stay with us too. Khalid, good morning.
Good morning, Hal. You're right. Very good topic.
Well, it's one that, of course, affects us all. It may not affect us when we're in our teens or in our 20s and our 30s, but as you get into your 50s, 60s, 70s, it is going to more so. So what do you think? How do you feel about this, Khalid, that these non-routine operations, as they're called, routine operations, as they're called. I mean, Suki Kaur, she itself has cancer, but she was talking about how debilitating it is for her sister-in-law. How do you feel?
The thing is within the NHS, our voices are not heard, and that's the only problem. Us healthcare practitioners, because I'm a practicing pharmacist with my own pharmacy, and we actually speak to our patients, and we know the concerns. We've raised it with these big bosses, and they're getting paid a lot of money to not implement the care for the patients. And my prime concern is always the patient. And I'm just frustrated in the way that big corporate bosses within the NHS and outside the NHS are making rules and regulations, and it's not benefiting the patient, but only their pockets. And that's where my concern is put patients first and not your pockets.
Well, the thing is, you guys were supposed to be brought in to a kind of more holistic kind of NHS, wasn't it, where pharmacists could take over some of the roles that beforehand went to GPs. How is that working?
Well, to be honest with you, I've got an online pharmacy, and I do a lot of my patient interactions away. I do operate blood pressure checks and health checks within a religious establishment like temples and mosques, and that's where I engage with customers, and I've got that quality time with them to spend and find out what issues that they are that we need to address. The NHS at the moment don't have that resource for healthcare practitioners to give them that value of time for them to implement a good patient care.
Are you seeing your workloads grow, though, now that patients are being advised to not go to the GP for every single thing that they need when actually the pharmacists can deal with a lot of these things?
The workload has grown slightly, but not to the potential of a pharmacist, what they can actually implement, because we do actually provide, we are the medicine experts, if you understand.
Yes.
But we're not engaging with doctors and other healthcare practitioners to see which is the best regime for them. If we actually put every individual patient first, we can ensure that the patient does receive the best quality of care from day one and not when they're 50 years old.
What do you think about that, Dr. Rees, about the shift from GPs to pharmacists? Not in everything, obviously.
I've forgotten the pharmacist's name. I missed his name, sorry. Khalid, yeah, again, very eloquent speaker, making really good points. Firstly, I think for some things it's good to go to see the pharmacist and get things, but it can't be used as something that covers all sins and just push loads of work out to the pharmacist just because the GPs are struggling and A&E is in crisis and failing. Then we can't just shift that workload. We can't just shift that workload to pharmacists because then they will break as well. I think, there's numerous wrecking balls lined up against the NHS, whether it be the junior doctor's contract, the consultant's contract, the pharmacy cuts, the nursing bursary cuts. I know nurses that have to use food banks to eat. And there's numerous wrecking balls lined up. And I'm grateful to you guys and Nihal in terms of letting me come on and speak, because I have phoned some radio stations who will remain nameless because there's no point in giving them the advertising. And they've said, yeah, no, that's really interesting, but it's a bit political. We don't want to talk about that today. Of course, it's all political, because ultimately it comes down to how much money, as a country, do we want to put into our health service? And I don't buy the argument that they're routine and non-routine or essential and non-essential operations, because the person who is crippled and can't walk up the stairs, and as you said, Ziki, your family member, if you give them a knee replacement or a hip replacement or whatever joint they need, they've got potentially 10 years. They've got 10 years of contributing to the economy, contributing to childcare, not being victimised and demonised in terms of as a benefits scrounger, because there are so many people that have been blamed. And I think it's pretty pathetic from a governmental level when we're starting blaming chronically ill people for the service. And, the population is getting older. And I think, to be fair, it's a failure of not just the Conservatives, but of New Labour and of the Lib Dems. I think all three political parties have failed the country, and they want to use the NHS as a political football to get into office, and then they forget about the patients at the end. And if one positive thing could have happened from the junior doctors contract movement is you've got thousands of doctors who have suddenly taken an interest in politics and also feel empowered to speak up. And, to the detriment of our careers, don't get me wrong, there are risks in terms of this. And people want to make lives difficult for doctors that are speaking out, myself included. But this isn't really the forum to go into that. But ultimately, we went into medicine to help patients. And if we don't speak out and if we remain silent as a profession, my fear is that it's going to move to a health insurance model, and basically it goes from waiting 18 weeks, 20 weeks, whatever, and it goes from, well, either you can afford it or you can't, and you will sadly die or suffer.
Can I just jump in there? In relation to if we do speak out, we get penalised.
Really?
Sorry?
So there's like a no whistle blowing.
No. There is some policy, but again, if you speak out against an organisation, we're going to get picked on to say, "Hang on, you're troublemakers," but we're not troublemakers. We're actually given the facts here straight to your face, but they don't want to hear it, and that's why they kind of penalise you and then just put you trying you to wean out the system by bullying.
Can I jump in here as well, please?
Yes, go on, Siki, of course you can.
Can I just jump in? Yeah. And what is lovely to see and what is lovely to hear is that you have a patient, you have a pharmacist, and you have a doctor here. Now, my experience with my doctors and my nurses has always been positive. The only thing that ever declined was that I just never saw them because there were just too many of us. But you could see how tired and frustrated the doctors were. You can see as a patient how tired and frustrated the nurses were. The operation that I was talking about, my biliary duct reconstruction, I was in a high dependency unit post-surgery, there was one nurse to 24 beds. And when you're in high dependency unit, you have to have like I had hourly checks at that point. My memory could be a bit incorrect. But this one nurse has to check your temperature, your blood pressure, and do drugs for those 24 patients. By the time she came to me at 6 o'clock in the morning at the end of that shift, her hands were shaking. And even I got a little bit scared because I thought, hang on, something's wrong here. She shouldn't be on her own.
The NHS is being cut to the bone. And I'm not sure whether, I'm not going to plug it unless I'm allowed, but I think Khaled said that patients and people aren't being involved and asked.
No.
I had to set up a social media broadcaster on social media to get this messaging out to the public because I saw, after a local news interview that I did, which was kind of cut in a way where I wasn't able to ask, or they tried to make it so I couldn't articulate my point, I saw that swathes of the mainstream media are just not interested in the real grassroots stories, and they just want to push the corporate agenda that's already been mentioned. So what I would suggest is seek out sources. If the Asian Network and the whole want to do a piece like this, then that's fantastic. But then it's up to us to kind of direct people towards this and also direct people towards social media.
Okay.
Because otherwise we're going to lose.
Dr. Rees, sorry, can I just, Suki, just repeat to me again what happened to you when a radiographer didn't turn up? Give me just...
No, it wasn't that. What it was, I have a routine scan every 3 months. And what normally happens after that scan is a radiographer will write up a report telling my oncologist whether my cancer has grown, which tumours have gone smaller and which ones have gone bigger. So that normally happens. What I normally do is I have my scan and a month later I will book my outpatient appointment to ensure they've had enough time to look at my scans. So the last 3 appointments that I've been to, I haven't been contacted beforehand. I've turned up for my oncology appointment and my consultants told me that we haven't got your report a month after my CT scan. Now, like I said, I've learned to adjust. I adjust with this new system, whereas before I knew 2 weeks later I could have an appointment and I would have my results. But this was 1 month later that I had no results. And apparently I was sitting in the waiting room and there's another 3 people who were probably in a much worse state than me, who, when you have results, when you're a cancer patient and you have that CT scan result, you are on edge until you know...
Your whole life stops as a result.
It does.
Your whole life stops, understandably so, and all I can do is apologise and say I think we should be doing better.
And you know what? I as a patient understand that, and I used to speak to my oncologist. I've spoken to my clinical nurses about it, and we all understand each other. But like I said, when you're a new patient, you're coming into this system, they are the people that I worry for.
Right, okay.
They're not...
Sorry, no, I understand. I really hate to interrupt you, Suki, trust me, but there are a lot of people we need to speak to as well, but stay with us if you can. Dan, not his real name, has got in contact with us. Thank you very much indeed for doing so. Good morning. What would you like to say, Dan?
Good morning. I've got an experience of more than 30 years. Both in the NHS, private sector, independent sector, which is not the private sector, and also have worked abroad. And I can say that NHS is still the best, but there are massive problems, as we heard this morning. There are certain issues which people keep away from. And as a consultant in the NHS, I have spoken against those and I've suffered. And that's the reason I'm being anonymous today.
Right, okay.
So the one issue which nobody seems to be talking about is there is no incentive for the consultants to reduce the waiting lists in the NHS. There is an ingrained system where if you have a bigger waiting list, a larger waiting list, a longer waiting list, you have a bigger private practice because patients who can afford or, they can save enough, they would rather go private than wait for 4 months, 6 months. And this has been exploited time and time again. And when the NHS poured in money to reduce the waiting list, the system changed to what is called a waiting list initiative. So the same consultants who would not be operating on 4 patients, say, for example, cataracts in a list, would get money to go to a private hospital and operate on 15 patients on the same day because they're paid by the NHS. So there has to be a system where the whole team is incentivized. At the moment, nurses have a different system. So if you're working in a team in a hospital, the consultant gets the benefit of having a longer waiting list. Nurses don't get anything unless they're given extra clinics. While in the independent sector, there is a very, very clear system of an incentive-driven hard work. So if you do more, you get paid more while doing high-quality service. So that's one point that I think somebody needs to address in a very clear manner.
Yeah, that's
Dan, that's a really interesting point, and I'm sorry to just jump in, but I've heard stories, maybe you could let me know whether this is true or not, in terms of senior consultants changing job plans of junior consultants so that they can't compete with their private practice.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And there is also an element of racial discrimination which goes on. A lot of the Caucasian consultants don't want the Asian
doctors to be doing it,
AME consultants to do practices, so they are given jobs or tasks which are, which do not generate private practice while they will be doing more hard work.
So, Dan, just to clarify, there is a financial incentive for consultants to keep longer waiting lists because that will encourage some of the patients on those lists to ask the consultant to do private work. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. That's true across the board, especially in areas in England. It is rampant. And before the 2004 reforms, when the Labour government had brought in outside independent sector companies to reduce the waiting list, this was the norm, that any consultant who has a long waiting list has a good private practice, and those areas, ethnic minority doctors were not given jobs because, that's my domain, my area. And then when the independent sector came and showed that you can actually do high quality, high volume work, I was actually involved in that work for 4 years. Then these very consultants became really, really angry and aggressive towards the independent sector because that affected their private practices.
Of course, yeah. I think we need to be careful as well in terms of we can't tar all consultants with the same brush.
Of course not.
Certain specialities will have more opportunity for private practice. For instance, like elective orthopedics, hips and knees.
Dermatology.
Practice.
Absolutely right.
I know a lot of people who go to private doctors for fertility. One of my friends had to pay her NHS consultant for fertility treatment because the waiting lists were too long. It all makes sense now, doesn't it?
I think the British Medical Association should be contacted to see what their take on it is, because I'm not really sure. And the reason that I'm saying this on national radio is because I was removed from the consultant contract forum, partly because I think we were so successful in terms of the media company that I set up in securing a no vote for the junior doctors contract. But I think it'd be interesting for the BMA to comment on this and pass comment on it, because they're interested in lots of things in terms of like boxing, health and all sorts, but this is a fundamental issue that affects the NHS. And the other really important point on this is if these things are being taken out, like the routine elective work or the work that is safe and money can be made from, what we're actually doing is we're de-skilling a generation of surgeons so that they don't have the basic surgical training to then deal with the more complicated, expensive stuff that's left on the NHS. So the cherry picking of this low-hanging fruit that's very lucrative for the insurance companies and private sector is very much the beginning of a slippery slope towards a full-scale conversion towards health insurance.
Dan, can I ask you, we've highlighted one of the issues, and it's a very interesting one that you have highlighted. What can be done to make sure that consultants focus more on their NHS patients and do not use these lists in order to procure more private practice? What can be done?
Well, two things which are possible. One is that there has to be some mechanism of delinking this waiting list to the private practice. And some of the hospitals, some of the NHS trusts have done that by pooling the list, though there's been a lot of resistance from the consultant body and BMA for that. But eventually the benefit of that is that there is a pooled list, and if someone is not pulling their weight, they're very obviously not benefited by the long list because others will do the work. That's one. The other one, which I feel very strongly about, we must learn from the independent sector. There has to be an incentive for the whole team. So instead of giving an extra work, extra money to the consultants in private, why don't we incentivize the whole team for doing harder work? So
should there be a contract? Sorry to interrupt you, sir, but should there be a contract that states that a consultant has to do a minimum amount of hours for the NHS, therefore, thus limiting their time to be able to do much more lucrative private work?
Hours are already there. It's not a question of hours. It's what
clearly it's not enough. Wait a minute, but clearly, Dan, it's not enough hours if a consultant is able to cream off money from private practice. Clearly, those hours are not enough if they have enough hours to earn money in there privately.
I think we need to be very careful about
I just gave you the example. In ophthalmology, there are consultants who are still doing 3 or 4 cataracts in a list, while the same consultant will go to the private hospital and do 16 cataracts in the same time.
Yeah.
So why is that? Well, can you tell me why that is?
There is in the contract, it doesn't say that you have to do 16 cataracts in a list.
So wait a minute, but you're saying that then the consultants are a lot less productive when dealing with NHS patients than they are dealing with private.
No, hold on. No, you can't. I don't think you can simplify it to that extent. You can't simplify it to that extent. What you've got
wait a minute. No, you can. I'm sorry, but in the same space of time, in the same... Look, I know you want to stick up for your profession, but I want to stick up for taxpayers who are paying money...
Sticking up for taxpayers and patients. And hold on one sec. Dan said what we need to do is we need to incentivise the whole healthcare professional team, the nurses, the porters, because it's not just the consultant that does that.
Okay, you tell me. No, you tell me, because a nurse does not have access to private practice in the same way, do they? And certainly, if they do, will not be able to charge the kind of money a consultant does. You tell me, you explain to me and explain to our... No, wait a minute, let me finish. You explain to our listeners, Dr. Rees, why it is that a consultant can do 3 times as many operations privately than they can when they're doing in the NHS.
A good team, because he or she has got a good team behind them in the private sector that is probably all incentivised to delivering 16 cataracts in a day. It's not just all...
Wait a minute. The NHS has... The NHS... No, you did that. But the NHS has the NHS has cutting-edge equipment. It is poured billions of pounds, much more. And in fact, when things go horribly wrong in private practice, you have to go to an NHS hospital to get things sorted out. So it's not as if they don't have the equipment to be able to deal with it. So then this is a case of... Instead of being able to go, because I'm sorry, but people listening, Dr. Rees, are going to find this really fishy. They're going to find this really dodgy.
Well, so if you don't let me answer the question, then
you answered it half, and you answered it pretty poorly. Answer the second time, then. Go on.
Well, if you stop talking over me...
Just answer the question, Dr. Rees. Go on.
No, I don't. I've always had a good time.
I'm giving you the option to answer it, so please answer it.
So I think what Dan said was if you have groups of people in the NHS where they're all rewarded, and what you were trying to achieve here is cultural change within the NHS. And it's incredibly difficult when you have organisations like the BBC, which are taxpayer funded as well, that are constantly interested in undermining confidence in a public service.
With all due respect, Dr. Rees, I think listeners will be very, very worried by the idea that because someone's getting paid more money, they're going to be able to do more. You're saying cultural change. These are all ambiguous phrases. I want to know... tell me technically then. Tell me technically. Don't say... Because they're such broad, nonsensical phrases. Just say to me, what practically can the NHS do so that a consultant will be able to deliver more operations to NHS patients than they do to private practice where they're getting paid a lot of money? Is it just a simple case of you pay them more?
You would need limits on private work. Of course you would, but also the circumstances cannot be allowed to persist where you've got patients that are suffering on waiting lists for a long time. Because in terms of health economics, there's an inelastic demand, okay? If somebody says to you, pay me $6,000 for your need to be fixed, you will pay $12,000 if you have to, because there's an inelastic demand. So we need to create cultural change within the NHS where people are pulling together and working together.
So pay women,
which is patient care, but then you can't have situations where funding is constrained so much from the top. You know, another thing that the
pay consultants more and they'll do more operations.
Pay consultants more. I didn't say pay consultants.
Well, I'm just trying to work this out because I'm just trying to work it out. I'm sure a lot of listeners are because you've
the
just.
Way that you want to shape this is that there's
listen. I am repeating what Dan, a consultant with over 30 years' experience, has said, which is that did you say cataract operations? There are going to be almost 3 times more you can do in the same period of time. And look, people are going to listen to this and think, well, wait a minute, you're going to do 3 times more in the same space of time.
To be fair, Dan said we should.
And they're going to earn a lot of money doing that, aren't they?
To be fair, Dan said we should learn lessons from the independent and private sector.
So, okay, well, let's ask Dan that then, because he's in it. So, Dan, how can you get consultants on the NHS to work at the same work rate that they do in the private sector? How can we get them to do that so that we can lessen some of these queues?
Absolutely. So the point, I think both of us are saying the same thing, but things got a little heated up. What I'm saying is independent sector has shown that if you incentivize the whole team...
What does that mean?
I'll give you example of cataract surgery.
No, give me an example of what you mean by the word incentivize.
So incentivize means that they should be given an extra payment, but not... So hold on. Let me finish.
Yeah.
Let me finish.
Right.
So you supposing you have a target in the NHS, and the NHS target says you have to do so many operations in a month. Now, the team that actually achieves that target should then be paid an X percentage of their salary, or each member of the
bonus
team.
schemes.
I think that's where we're...
Okay, wait a minute. Dr. Rees, I'm not talking to you for the moment, so please just relax for a second. I will ask you a question when I need to. Dan, so then what the question is then is that essentially this is about if you give health professionals bonus schemes to say, look, the more operations you do, the more you'll get paid, then you think that will sort it out? Because that's the incentivising.
No. Again, I think you're twisting my words. What I'm saying is...
Well done, well said.
You said more payments.
It should not be a disincentive. Currently, there is a disincentive. If I work harder, if I do 15 cases, I don't have a private practice, while the other guy in the same department getting paid the same amount of money does 4 cases, and he has a massive private practice.
But that's all of what you're saying.
For me, right? So the solution, what I'm suggesting, is rather than having this warped system, this incentivizing system, have an incentive in the NHS. So you could put a restriction on recently qualified consultants. Say, for example, 5 years after you specialize in a field, you will not be allowed private practice. BMA has been very much against it. I suggested it about 15 years ago. For 5 years, there should be no private practice. After that, once you're settled in your job and you've done lots and lots of work, yes, you can do private practice. During those 5 years, the team, the whole team, the nurses, the porters, everybody involved, the receptionist in the clinic, should have a bonus-based scheme only during those periods,
right?
To say that whosoever is working,
right? Okay, so I get all of that. I mean, that's perfectly obvious. You're resenting, or give an example of a consultant who will resent the fact that they will do the same amount of cataract operations. We'll keep it on that. They'll do the same amount, but they won't be financially incentivised. They won't get any bonuses for that, whereas someone will do less cataract operations than you on the NHS and then go off and do the same amount of you but be paid more for it. So it does come down to the fact, right, okay, so then it is about bonuses and incentivising, and that's what it's about. So essentially...
There's also another element to it. There's also another element. Currently, the private practice, the private hospitals are actually subsidising. Private practice is subsidised by the NHS. So if a patient gets a complication in the private sector, what happens? They're immediately referred back to NHS.
That's the point I just made some moments ago. Exactly that.
No, I agree.
Yeah,
and we need to be defensive of the NHS, and we need to stand up. But we also you can't have leeches sucking money out of it, and it's not.
But you can't also have consultants who are much more productive with more money they get. But what happened to the Hippocratic Oath? What happened to that?
It's not, Nihal, it's not just that. It's I don't know whether I'm going to be invited back on here again. I'm not sure. So
of course you are. Don't be so paranoid.
Good. So put it this way. I'm not getting paranoid, but put it this way, right, Nihal, is I don't think it's fair, but it's just in terms of money, because if you look at doctors and nurses, right, in the NHS...
You yourself said you've been blocked.
Doctors blocked. In what way?
Didn't you just say that there's a blockage for junior consultants by consultants if you're doing work too quickly and making...
No, not at all. No, what I said was I've heard stories that if you are becoming a new consultant and you're a junior consultant, then the senior ones will change the job plan of that new consultant so that they can't compete with private practice. And that is a bad idea.
And that's scandalous.
It is scandalous, but what
our listeners, how much are consultants? No, so I'm not fishing for...
Let me finish my point. Then. What I'm saying is you've got doctors and nurses that are caring and compassionate individuals. And the only reason I'd like to get this in, because I've got to go and teach students at 11, right, is if you create circumstances and environments where those staff members are looked after and they're cared for, and people are nice,
given more money,
they will love going to work. It's not just about more money. It's about creating an environment where people can do what they've been trained to do.
Clearly, you've also got consultants, as Dan, who with 30 years' experience, is saying, who are willing to work 3 times as harder in private practice to earn, I can imagine, a whole lot of money. And that is insulting to NHS patients.
It's not just the consultant. You can't say that the consultant is willing to work 3 times harder.
Well, that's the numbers. You're a doctor. That is the numbers.
If it's not just...
God, you're ignoring the facts. Look, I understand.
It is the nurses, it is the recovery staff, it is the anaesthetist, it is a whole team of people that are working together to get those numbers through. And what Dan said about 40 minutes ago is if you can make... He said his incentive, if you asked him, it would be money. If you asked me, it would be a cultural change. But what he says is if you reward the NHS team... It does. Well, I'm an MBA student at Nottingham now, so it does mean a lot, actually.
Well, what does... No, it doesn't. The word cultural change I hear across all kinds of organisations. It doesn't mean anything unless you have the specifics of what that means.
Well, if you give me the chance to talk about it, I'll tell you.
Well, you have. You've just mentioned cultural change about 10 times.
Because that's what it's about, Nihal. That's what it's about.
I can clarify that, Nihal.
Please do, Dan.
Clarify that. So... basically, when we talk about cultural change, it's the thinking that NHS is free for everybody. We are employed by the sort of government, and we are paid a fixed salary. So we should only work as much as we, there is no extra incentive to do hard work. So to give you an example, I went to US. The US surgeons who start a list at 6:30 in the morning, and the list carried on till about 8:30 p.m. in the evening, with every single staff remaining on the list, nurses, the porters, the technicians, everybody. And at the end of the day, I asked the consultant, I said, how can you do that? Because in the NHS, I can't even get my staff at 9:30. To start a list. Everybody is sort of scrounging around and doing things. And he said, it's very simple. I make $6 million, but my technician also makes $100,000 a year. And my nurse makes, I'm talking about year 1988. So the point is the whole...
But the NHS is never going to be able to, Dan, pay the same prices as private practice, is it?
Absolutely. I'm not saying the same price. I'm saying there has to be a mechanism where you enjoy working with the team. The team doesn't feel that now this guy is going to go off to another hospital and make 10 times the money. Why should we help him to, do that?
Quite.
The team
I think we should be very careful with comparisons in that sector, because in America, people die as a result. If they don't have health insurance, they die. So we can talk about £50 million a year.
Exactly, and I'm not proposing American system, because the US spends 14.5% at the moment. I think it has probably increased now of the GDP. We don't want to do that, but we must take the good things out of that system and implement those. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying we should go with, because that's an insurance-based system. Okay. There, the only incentive is money.
Okay, wait a minute. I just want to play a minute, a 27 clip of what Simon Stevens, the boss of NHS England, has to say about this, and then we'll come back and get some more opinions.
The NHS has made huge strides over the course of the last 10 or 15 years in cutting long waits for operations, and we're determined not to go back from that. So people, I think, would be surprised to remember that 15 years ago, you might be waiting 18 months for your hip or your knee operation. Now, 9 out of 10 people, it's 18 weeks. The average wait for an operation is 10 weeks. Now, what we're saying is that over the next couple of years, we want to have more funded operations on the NHS, but we recognise that the rate of growth is probably going to have to be a little bit slower than it has been at points in the past, because we also want to make big improvements in cancer care, in GP services and in mental health services as well. The reality is that there are pressures right across the health service. They're well known. And under those circumstances, we have to make a start on sorting out particularly those pressures in A&E departments, which we've seen over the course of the last winter. It's right that we start with the most urgent and pressing problems, but then over the course of the next several years, we want to be able to continue to expand the amount of surgery that's being done so that waiting times stay low. Fact is that we're providing 5,000 more operations a day now than we were in 2010, and we've got one of the lowest waiting times for routine non-urgent operations of any industrialised country.
Brilliant. Dan, what do you make of that?
I agree with that, but the only problem is the way this was done was, again, by incentivizing, but not the whole team, but a few of the people who were not really pulling their weight during the working hours. So you give them, there's been a huge element of waiting list initiatives in orthopedics for the hips and knees, and in ophthalmology and in dermatology, where these people were given big amount of money to go to the private sector and operate on NHS patients. That's how NHS has brought it down, and that has cost a lot of money. What I'm saying is, if we can increase the efficiency of the systems within the NHS hospital, and now we have the infrastructure, most of the hospitals have been upgraded, new hospitals have been built. There is capacity now in the NHS hospitals where we can do that kind of work at high volumes. I've been trying my best in my department, but there is so much resistance from the other consultants. Okay,
well, I think it's fascinating. You've definitely opened up, I'm sure, a lot of people's eyes to the different challenges. So thank you so much for coming on. Thank you, Dr. Kishan Rees, as well. Let's speak to Nisha, lastly, who's on the line. Nisha, hello.
Hi.
Tell us what your experience has been like.
Okay, so about 5 years ago, I suffered a spinal cord injury. And when I would complain to the doctors about it, they seemed to tell me I was pregnant at the time. It was pregnancy related. Anyway, after I've had the baby, it transpires that it's a bit more serious than that. And I'm again sent by my GP for an emergency MRI. But I saw 3 consultants. The first 2 refused to give me an MRI scan. The following day, I'm called back to see a 3rd consultant. He's also refusing, and I was really struggling to walk. I had numbness in my on my legs, in my groin area. My bladder wasn't working properly. I was wetting myself. I understand these are red flag symptoms and the doctors should have quickly acted. However, this third consultant, the first two didn't, and the third consultant finally agreed after I cried. And I was sent for an emergency scan. The result was that I had, he called it a giant disc prolapse. And I actually had an emergency condition which required an emergency operation. However, I had to wait about 10 hours before I had my first emergency operation. I've got something called cauda equina syndrome. It's a spinal cord injury, and it's left me with devastating effects. There was a first operation which was delayed by 10 hours, and that was because it took them 10 hours to take me from one hospital to the other, from what I was told. I had another operation which was delayed by a second emergency operation, which was delayed by about 24 hours, and a third emergency operation. I can't really remember whether
Nisha,
there was or wasn't a delay on that.
We've run out of time. Nisha, sorry, we have run out of time, but I know for a fact from what you're saying and from what our listeners will hear that clearly it changes your life without getting this.
Yes, the delays meant I was left with life-changing effects. I was a primary school teacher and left unable to work. I have young children. This morning I couldn't go on the school run because I can't. Although I wasn't paralysed, because the condition leads to being paralysed, I was left. I'm left unable to walk very fast or very long.
We'll have to leave it there.
For a certain distance.
Nisha, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. BBC Asian Network. That was Nisha, not her real name. Really interesting conversation I think we had this morning about that, and thank you to all my guests who got involved in it. And NHS, of course, is a conversation that will run and run and run.